Hey folks, welcome back to the Contrarians. This is a solo edition where myself is going to look at the catalog of the group the Groundhogs, one of my favorite bands of all time. And I'm going to tell you why I'm contrarian on their discography, as we usually do on the series, where one of us picks a dark horse album from a band and champions that album as their best, or even sometimes even personal favorite. Don't forget to subscribe, like our channel if you can. Comment, tell us why you agree or disagree. We also have a Patreon where we have exclusive content going on there, and a Ko-Fi account if you don't want to subscribe for a monthly fee. Today, I'm going to be looking at the Groundhogs, and I'm going to do this a little bit backwards. Usually when Martin does it, he'll give you his contrarian choice, or he'll give you the history of the band, his contrarian choice, and what the albums that are usually up for contention are. I'm going to kind of do this a little backwards, or I'm going to tell you about the Groundhogs just briefly, and then I'm going to go through what their basic general consensus greatest albums are, and then give you what mine is and why I'm picking it. So basically, the Groundhogs is pretty heavy blues rock band originating in the early 60s. They had released a couple of albums, starting with Scratching the Surface, which is very bluesy, and Blues Obituary, which is a little more transitioning to the sound that they would become, a little more hard rock, but it's still pretty bluesy to me. Those albums are pretty good. I like them both. They really start to hit their stride with Thank Christ for the Bomb and Split, which are their next two records, as a power trio with, of course, Tony McPhee on guitar. Those two records are generally considered their best records. In fact, Split, I think, always comes in on top. And I've done a little bit of research, not too much. It really is just general consensus that Split is their greatest record. And you can look at rankings and online discussions and forums and stuff like this. It's pretty consistent across the board. That Split is takes the top spot. And even one statistic I have from best ever albums ranks Split at number one, Thank Christ at number two. So they're pretty consistently ranked at the top of the heap when it comes to Groundhog records. I like both of those records a lot. Thank Christ for the Bomb is super solid, start to finish. Even like the second half of it, from Garden to Status People to Rich Man, Poor Man, Eccentric Man, like that second half is super solid. Even the first half, like the whole record is solid start to finish when it comes to good rock and jammy tunes. I really like Thank Christ for the Bomb. My first experience with the Groundhogs dates back to when I was in high school. The first record that I had from the Groundhogs was Live at Leeds '71, which has 5 tracks on it, and they're all live. And I believe it was from a show where they were opening for the Rolling Stones. Thanks to my cousin Carmen, who was a musician and had an awesome record collection, who introduced me to the band by giving me Live at Leeds and introduced me to bands like the Groundhogs, Bloodwind Pig, Cactus. Like these are bands I would have never even known about if it wasn't for him. And the tracks on there are Split, Cherry Red, Garden, Groundhog Blues, and Eccentric Man. So that was the first record that I had from the Groundhogs when I was in high school. So that's very nostalgic for me. And that entire live set is based off of Thank Christ for the Bomb and Split. And all 5 of those tracks to me are super nostalgic. I love all 5 of them. Garden is probably my favorite Groundhog song ever, which comes from Thank Christ for the Bomb. So I'm very partial when it comes to those tunes and those records. And I really do think they probably are the top of the heap. I like Split. I like all 4 parts of Split. At different times, I could have picked different parts of Split as my favorite from that record. Cherry Red, I'll never get sick of. I could listen to that probably every day. That was my introduction to Groundhogs. Like I had said, Cherry Red was from Live at Leeds, and that was one of the songs that for me just blew me away and made me an instant fan of the Groundhogs. Day in the Life from Split is a little mellower, but it packs a punch. Junkman takes you on a nightmarish roller coaster ride. The timbre of Tony's guitar playing is often piercing. The bass is usually pretty round and deep. The drums have dynamic range as usual. Like these records, Thank Christ and Split, like set the tone for what the Groundhogs does best, and they do it the best on those 2 records. So basically, my introduction was Live at Leeds, and I had that in high school. Up until about college, that was the only thing I knew about the Groundhogs was that record. And then sometime in college, I picked up the box set that had the first 5 records on 3 CDs. and I think it was called Thank Christ for the Groundhogs, and it had the first 5 CDs, which had Blues Obituary, Scratching the Surface, Thank Christ for the Bomb, Split, and Who Will Save the World, the Mighty Groundhogs. So that was kind of where I really sunk my teeth into the Groundhogs. And it wasn't until years later when I got Spotify or even checking out some other stuff on YouTube here and there that I really started to discover more of what the band had offered after those first 5 records and Live at Leeds, obviously. Who Will Save the World? I would rank pretty high up there as well. And it might just be because, again, I had that box set and I was very familiar with it. I know some people online regard it a little less compared to like Hogwash even and Split and Thank Christ for the Bomb, but I quite like it. It's definitely softer than Split, but I think it grooves pretty much the same. And I think, it has just as many cool riffs and lyrical content as Thank Christ for the Bomb. Earth Is Not Room Enough is definitely a head bobber, but still has that piercing guitar, harmonics, and soloing in it from previous records. Wages of Peace is probably the standout track for me, as well as Bog Roll Blues. Though the record does falter near the end, I think Amazing Grace is kind of whatever. They could have left that off. I think Gray Maze, though, the final track on the record, picks it back up, and it has the Groundhogs rocking out in classic form. So I do like Who Will Save the World. The Hogwash comes next. I really like Hogwash. Really consistent with their records after that. I mean, they were all pretty good and had really good stuff on it. They took a little break for a while, but I mean, they had Hogwash, Solid came out after that, Crosscut, Saw came out after that, and like each one basically has their own standout tracks that I like a lot. Like on Solid, there's Snowstorm, which harkens back to Split. So if you like Split and you want to get into some other stuff, check out Solid, check out Snowstorm. It's a good introduction to something different from the Groundhogs. And the vocals on that are as grittier and gruffer than ever. It almost feels like fuzzy in a way. But Crosscut Saw has the 11th Hour, which is one of the coolest Groundhog tracks ever for me personally. For some reason, too, when I listen to that track, The 11th Hour, which I think is the last track off the record, Crosscut Saw, that makes me think this band could have transitioned into a really heavy new wave of British heavy metal band. Even though 11th Hour is somewhat softer than normal, but it's almost like Martin will call ballads from bands like Judas Priest, like dirges. It's kind of dirges, and it has really cool stuff going on that track. And I always think like, man, these guys could have transitioned very well into like a new wave of British heavy metal band if they wanted to, and it would have been very exciting. Even though they hint at that on Razor's Edge, where Tony goes full Lemmy on the vocals in that one. I think they could have gotten like really, really heavy. But this leads me to my contrarian pick, my favorite Groundhogs album, the one that I think is the best, or at least as good as Split and Thank Christ for the Bomb, which is Black Diamond, which came out in 1976. It's not the classic lineup, but Tony is all over this record. So Tony McPhee is on guitar and vocals, Rick Adams on guitar, Martin Kent bass, Mick Cook drums. So here, I think this is really Groundhogs at probably their most rocking and jammy out of almost anything they ever did. And if you like that kind of sound, this record is for you for sure. Each track, for different reasons, stands out on its own. Each track is pretty unique. I think it's the tempo is pretty upbeat across the board here. The record doesn't really slow down much. Sometimes it's melancholic, as usual with Groundhogs, especially with Tony's grumbling vocals. But for me, it never disappoints. The blues rock guitar jumps right out through the speaker and cuts through the mix on almost every track. This is a literal garden of things that I love about the Groundhogs. I think it's just very well produced. Sonically, I think things are very clear and very precise. I love the hook on the chorus of Fantasy Partner. I love the soloing on Live Right. I like the keys on Your Love Keeps Me Alive. I think they're very empowering and uplifting, and they contrast very well with the twangy guitar sounds while not really losing each other either. Listen to the solos. Each track has its own personality when you listen to the solos that really makes each track stand out on their own across the record, Black Diamond. I think the opening track, even, Body Talk, it's kind of commercial. It almost sounds like something you would hear that would open a feature film. or they would use it in the trailer of a feature film. It kind of sounds commercial, almost timeless in a sort of way, where you could picture it being used in commercials, and maybe it should have. You could hear it on the radio. I get, like, you don't ever hear the Groundhogs on the radio, but that's something that you could hear on the radio. But also, what I like about the record is that it has all these different things going for it. Like, it has a little bit of commercial stuff going on. It has like classic Groundhog stuff going on, but also has a lot of attitude, like on songs like Frenzy. Pastoral Future is one of my favorite instrumental songs ever. It's a really cool instrumental. It would work really well in a live setting. It's very blithesome in nature. I enjoy that instrumental. It's not super long. It's not one of these like 10-minute instrumentals where you kind of start feeling like you're getting drawn out of the album. It kind of keeps you going along. And it's right at the end too, which leads you right into Black Diamond, the title track, which I like a lot, which is another very uplifting, warm song lyrically and musically, and ends the record on a high note, with having the classic Groundhog sound and the hooky chorus and everything in Black Diamond, the track. I pretty much like every song off of this record, and I think it's one of their strongest records, alongside Thank Christ for the Bomb and Split. So, like, overall, it's definitely the highlight of the non-original lineup for sure for me in the catalog. Now, does it have anything on it that's as dynamic singularly as something like Cherry Red, or personally iconic to me as Garden? No. Those two songs to me, like I said, anything off live in Leeds from 71 to me is just like iconic and classic. And I don't think any of these songs reach the heights of those two tracks. But I will say overall, I think the record from start to end is about as solid as Thank Christ or Split. But at the end of the day, I think if you're a fan of the Groundhogs because of things like Thank Christ for the Bomb or Split, but you're not really sure where to go after that, or you're not very familiar with the Groundhogs past those two records, then definitely I would say this is probably the best next place to go. You can't really do wrong, actually. Even if you go to like Hogwash or something like this, like, you can't really do wrong with the Groundhogs. But I think if you're somebody who says, I know Split and Thank Christ, but not much else from the Groundhogs, I think this record is a great lineup of greatly produced, quality structured songs, and just an excellent package to showcase what the Groundhogs can do outside of those two records if you're not as familiar with them. For me, it's my personal favorite. For me, it's my go-to nowadays. And maybe it's because I grew up the last 10 years with Thank Christ, and more than 10 years ago now, actually. I grew up with Thank Christ and Split. So maybe Black Diamond just at some point was just a much more fresher sounding record to me. And I maybe go back to it more because it's fresher sounding to me, to my ears. So maybe that's why I'm kind of putting it above. At worst, I would say it's tied with those two, in my opinion. Other people may disagree, but I guess that's the point of the show. But I hope I kind of at least gave you some insight of why I really dig Black Diamond. Again, I think all the songs are structured very well. I think they're really good on that. I think it's classic sounding Groundhog sound, which you can't go wrong with that. Tony's guitar and vocals are excellent. But other than that, I think I kind of made my point. I think I made my points about the records. If you're not familiar with the Groundhogs, check them out. They definitely had a very long career. They put out many albums. There's something for everyone there. If you like blues, if you like hard rock, if you like even new wave of British heavy metal, this is something. Some of their stuff kind of borderlines on that. So if you don't know who the Groundhogs are, check them out. If you do know who the Groundhogs are, hopefully you will have enjoyed this episode. And again, check us out on Patreon. We got lots of exclusive stuff going on there. We're gonna have more episodes up soon. And thanks a lot for stopping by, and hope you dug the episode. Take care.
That's it, dude.